The silence of space was broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Captain Alara Creel stared out into the vast blackness, her eyes narrowing as she examined the slowly approaching alien vessel. It was a relic of a forgotten war, once proud and mighty, but now weathered and scarred, as if it too had felt the sting of time's cruel hand. Yet, the Zloth had not forgotten their primary mission, the eradication of humanity. Alara clenched her fists around the control panel, the memory of her people's destruction still raw. The Zloth had come, their massive warships appearing out of nowhere, and within weeks they had decimated Earth's defenses, hunting down the last survivors with clinical precision. Every attempt to fight back had failed. Every hope of survival had crumbled. But what the Zloth had not counted on was the resilience of the human spirit. Though Earth was gone, its people were not, and humanity had learned how to survive in the stars. "We're closing in, Captain," reported Commander Roland, her second-in-command. He was a tall man with sharp features, his dark eyes gleaming with an intensity that matched Alara's own. He had been with her from the beginning of the long trek from Earth, a journey that had taken them through countless star systems and left them battle-worn. "How many ships?" Alara asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "3. They are part of a larger fleet, but these are the ones assigned to track us down. They've been hunting the remnants of humanity for months," Roland replied, his gaze flickering to the radar. "They know we're here. They know we're the last." Alara's lips curled into a grim smile. The Zloth had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. They thought they had wiped out the last of the human race, but they had missed something crucial. "We've been preparing for this," Alara said, her voice low but filled with a deadly promise. "Let's show them what happens when you hunt the last humans across the stars." The crew moved with practiced precision, gathering at their posts. The Vanguard, a ship built from the wreckage of Earth's space stations and salvage technology, was humanity's final hope. Its design was unconventional, a patchwork of repurposed parts, but it was fast, agile, and deadly. In their hands, it would be more than enough to turn the tide of this war. The Zloth were an advanced race, with technology far beyond what humanity had ever achieved. But the human mind, when pushed to the edge, could create wonders of its own. And Captain Creel had seen firsthand what a desperate people could accomplish. "Prepare for engagement," Alara ordered. Her voice was cold, calculated. There was no fear in her heart, only a singular focus, survival and vengeance. As the Vanguard moved closer to the enemy fleet, the tension in the air was palpable. Every sensor on the ship hummed with activity, feeding back data about the enemy ship's movements and weapon systems. The Zloth were formidable, but they had one flaw that humanity had learned to exploit: arrogance. They thought their technological superiority would make them untouchable. But Alara had studied them, and she knew their weaknesses. She had learned how to fight a war that no one thought could be won. "Lock weapon systems," Roland said, his voice tight with readiness. "We're going in hot, Captain." Alara nodded, her fingers moving over the control panel with practiced ease. The Vanguard shuddered slightly as it engaged its weapon systems, preparing to unleash a deadly barrage. But this wasn't just about firepower. It was about strategy, precision, and the raw determination to survive. The enemy ships drew closer, their massive hulls looming like shadows in the distance. The Zloth, for all their might, had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the fire that burned inside humanity. It was a fire that could not be extinguished, no matter how many worlds they destroyed. Alara's heart raced as she prepared for the attack. Her thoughts flashed to her family, to Earth, and to every human who had ever been hunted by the Zloth. This was for them. For humanity, Alara muttered, almost to herself. Then she spoke to her crew. "On my mark. This ends today." The countdown began. Time slowed, the seconds stretching long and thin, until finally, she gave the order. "Now." The Vanguard leaped into action, its engines flaring as it shot toward the enemy fleet, weapons blazing. In the chaos of the first volley, Alara felt a surge of triumph. The Zloth had no idea what was coming. But as the first ship exploded in a burst of brilliant light, a cold realization hit Elara. This was only the beginning. The battle would be hard, and the losses would be high, but humanity had always been at its best when fighting against overwhelming odds. And the Zloth had just awakened a force they could never defeat. The last humans were fighting back. The vanguard danced through space, a streak of brilliance against the black abyss. Its weapons, an intricate mesh of human ingenuity and desperation, tore through the enemy's outer shields. Sparks of blue and green erupted from the Zloth ships as their hulls buckled under the barrage. The Zloth had always been confident in their technology, but they had not reckoned with humanity's sheer will to survive. Captain Elara Creel's eyes were locked on the control panel, her hands moving swiftly, coordinating their next move. The Zloth's flagship, a massive behemoth brimming with firepower, had not yet responded to their attack. It had to be waiting, calculating, anticipating. The Zloth never attacked without precision, and their strategy was a deadly dance of patience. Shields holding at 75%, Captain, Roland reported, his voice tight with focus. But they're regrouping. They're adapting faster than we expected. Elara narrowed her eyes. Adapting. That was the crux of it. Humanity's advantage wasn't just in technology, but in the unrelenting ability to adapt to new circumstances. Every defeat, every loss, had taught them something. They had learned, and they had learned quickly. But the Zloth had the advantage of experience and numbers. The momentary silence that followed the first exchange of fire didn't last long. A ripple of movement spread across the Zloth fleet, and Elara knew what was coming. The fleet was reorganizing. They were going to make their counterstrike. Prepare to engage evasive maneuvers, Elara ordered, her voice calm, betraying none of the storm raging in her chest. Roland's face tightened. Aye, Captain. The vanguard twisted violently as the first wave of counterattacks descended upon them. Massive laser beams lanced across the void, slicing through the darkness with blinding speed. The ship shuddered, groaning under the intensity of the fire. The ship's shields flickered, barely managing to absorb the deadly assault. We're losing shields, the systems officer Zara called out, her voice sharp with alarm. Hold it together. Elara snapped, her hands flying over the controls. The ship lurched again, this time a direct hit to the port side. The vanguard listed, its momentum faltering. Elara gritted her teeth. This was the moment when many would have faltered, given up. But not her crew. A heavy breath, a pulse of adrenaline, and the captain's voice cut through the chaos, steady and determined. Now, deploy the flares and initiate the decoy program. Let's make them chase ghosts. The Zloth were known for their advanced targeting systems. But humans, with their knack for misdirection, had found a way to play them at their own game. Flares erupted from the vanguard side, trailing long ribbons of bright light. The ship suddenly split into a dozen false signatures on the Zloth sensors. For a moment, the enemy's fleet hesitated, confused. But it didn't last long. They were still relentless hunters, and now they were angry. They've fallen for it, Roland exclaimed, his face breaking into a rare smile. Elara didn't return it. Her mind was racing. They're closing in. We need to keep them off us long enough for the backup to arrive. We're being tracked, Captain, Zara shouted, her hands flying across the console. They're locking onto our real signature. Damn it, Elara muttered under her breath. They had only bought themselves a few moments of respite, and now the real fight was beginning. The Zloth weren't going to let them go so easily. Just as Elara began to calculate their next move, a warning light flashed on her screen. Another ship had entered the vicinity. An unfamiliar signal, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. Who the hell is that? Roland asked, his brow furrowed. Elara's heart skipped a beat. She quickly ran a diagnostic on the signal. There was no mistaking it. The design was unmistakable, human. We're not alone, Elara said, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. That's the Pride of Sol. They've arrived. The Pride of Sol, a larger vessel than the Vanguard, was part of a fleet of survivors that had been scattered after the fall of Earth. For months, they had been trying to establish contact, but the Zloth had been hunting them down relentlessly. To see them now, fighting alongside her in this moment of peril, it was nothing short of miraculous. Deploy reinforcements. We're not backing down now, Ilara ordered. The Pride of Sol opened fire immediately, its heavy artillery slicing through the enemy lines. The Zloth flagship returned fire, but it was too late. The battle had turned. The Zloth were no longer the hunters. The Pride of Sol and Vanguard had delivered a well-timed blow to their pride, and now the tide was shifting. But Ilara knew better than to get complacent. The Zloth were dangerous, and they were not ones to surrender easily. The battle was far from over. It was only just beginning. We've got them on the run, but we need to end this before they regroup, Ilara said, her tone sharp and resolute. Prepare the final strike. This will be our one shot. With the arrival of their allies, humanity's last stand had shifted from survival to retaliation. The Zloth had thought they were eradicating a broken species, but they had awakened a force they couldn't comprehend. The last humans were fighting back, and they were far from done. You said. The Vanguard and the Pride of Sol hung like twin giants in the vast expanse of space, their weapons flashing in synchronization as they tore through the Zloth fleet. The coordinated assault was something Ilara had hoped for, but never expected so soon. After years of hiding in the shadows, scavenging remnants of old technology, and scraping by on the fringes of space, humanity had found its fury. Shields at 30%, Captain, Zara reported, her voice tinged with concern. We can't take much more of this. Ilara's gaze flickered to the battle unfolding around them. The Zloth had regrouped quickly, reinforcing their defenses, and the reinforcements from the Pride of Sol were holding strong. But the enemy's relentless pursuit had them outnumbered. The odds were still stacked against them, and they couldn't keep trading blow for much longer. Ilara, Roland said, his voice low but urgent. He was standing beside her, scanning the battlefield with steely eyes. The Zloth flagship is pulling back. They're trying to regroup. Regroup. Ilara muttered, eyes narrowing. She glanced at the data streaming across her command console. The flagship, a towering and dreadfully powerful ship, had been a persistent force in the battle. Its dark, imposing hull now seemed to be pulling back into the heart of the fleet, as if it were preparing for something bigger. They're organizing a final assault, Roland said, his words confirming her thoughts. They're going to try to crush us once and for all. I know, Ilara replied, her mind already working through the options. The Zloth were a calculated species. If they were retreating, they likely had one last devastating move in mind. The last thing they would do was abandon their superiority without ensuring they destroyed everything in their path. We can't let them gain any more ground, Ilara said, her voice cutting through the tension in the cockpit. Signal the Pride of Sol. We hit them with everything we've got, all at once. No retreat. Roland met her gaze, his eyes steady. Understood, Captain. On the bridge of the Pride of Sol, Commander Saranavet, a seasoned leader of humanity's last surviving fleet, watched the chaos unfold on the main screen. Her vessel, though massive, was far slower than the nimble Vanguard, but it had power in numbers, heavy guns, and shields capable of withstanding even the worst the Zloth could throw at them. Saren's hand tightened on the console, her jaw set. Ilara's right, she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible. We have one chance to take them down. Commander, her communications officer called out. We're receiving a direct signal from the Vanguard. Saren's eyes snapped up to the screen. It was Ilara. Her face was drawn, but resolute. We've been pushing back the Zloth, but they're preparing something big, Ilara said, her voice low but urgent. We need to strike hard, now, before they can finalize whatever they're planning. I've set a course for their flagship. Prepare to follow us in full assault. Saren didn't hesitate. The decision was simple. Humanity was not going to go down quietly. Engage engines. Full speed ahead. All weapons primed, Saren ordered, her voice commanding. Let's end this. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines flaring to life as it sliced through the stars with a Pride of Sol following closely behind. The two ships were a formidable force, but Alara knew their best shot at victory lay in a single, coordinated attack. They had to hit the Zloth flagship with everything they had before it had time to mount its final assault. Alara were being locked onto. Zara cried out, her hands flying over the console as a wave of incoming fire flooded their screens. The Zloth ships had reorganized, forming a defensive wall around the flagship. Brace for impact. Alara shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. The Vanguard shuddered violently as the first wave of enemy fire slammed into its shields, followed by a second, more forceful strike. The ship's hull groaned, a sound that felt like the groaning of a dying creature. Shields are failing. Zara's voice broke through the din of the battle. We can't hold out much longer. But Alara didn't flinch. She had a plan, and it was risky, very risky, but it was the only shot they had. Roland, ready the final strike. We're going to hit them where it hurts. Roland's eyes flicked to her, and then to the array of weapons controls. You're not thinking. I am, Alara interjected, her gaze never leaving the tactical display. We'll use the pride of soul as our decoy. We can't outrun their firepower, but we can outsmart them. We'll get in close, and then we launch a final strike right through their weak point. Roland exhaled, his lips curling into a grin. You've always liked to make things interesting. The final assault began. The Vanguard and Pride of Soul split their forces, one going low, the other high, as they dove toward the flagship. The Zloth responded in kind, firing everything they had at the approaching ships. But the human ships weren't just flying straight toward them. They moved with a grace that defied logic, weaving and dodging in a deadly dance of destruction. The Pride of Soul took the brunt of the enemy fire, sacrificing its shields to create an opening for the Vanguard. Now, Alara yelled, her voice filled with adrenaline. Fire everything we've got. The Vanguard unleashed a torrent of weapons, missiles, plasma bursts, and kinetic rounds, slamming into the flagship's lower decks. The flagship's shields were already compromised, and the concentrated fire tore through its hull with devastating effect. A massive explosion erupted from within the Zloth ship. The shockwave rippled outward, sending debris spiraling into space. For a brief moment, there was a haunting stillness. Then, a flare of bright light. The Zloth flagship detonated in a blaze of fire and destruction. It was over. But as the debris from the explosion drifted into the void, Alara's heart did not slow. One victory would not stop the Zloth. It was only the beginning of a much larger war. We've only taken down one ship, Alara muttered, eyes scanning the wreckage. We've won today, but the real fight has only just begun. And so, with the flagship gone and their hearts filled with a hard-won triumph, humanity's fight for survival would continue. This time, however, they were no longer just running. They were fighting back. And the Zloth would learn to fear the last humans across the stars. You said. The remnants of the Zloth flagship drifted slowly into the void, reduced to a fragmented husk of charred metal. The silence that followed the explosion was almost surreal, like a breath held too long before being released in a heavy sigh. But it didn't last. Alara Creel stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her hands gripping the control panel with the intensity of a warrior who had survived 1,000 battles. Her breath was shallow, her mind already racing ahead to what would come next. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. One ship down was hardly enough to ensure victory. Damage report, now. Alara barked, her eyes never leaving the screen that displayed the burning wreckage of the Zloth flagship. Shields at 12%, Captain. The hull is holding, but just barely, Zara, the ship's systems officer, reported, her voice strained. We've taken heavy damage to the aft thrusters and communications array. It's going to take some time to fully recover. Alara's jaw tightened. The Vanguard was far from finished, but it was far from healthy, either. Still, there was no time to nurse the ship back to health. The battle was far from won, and they had just made an enemy more dangerous than ever. Commander Saren? Alara called over the comms, connecting to the Pride of Soul. She had to know what their next move was. The Pride had taken heavy fire in the final strike, and Alara was certain that their forces were equally battered. "Saren here. We've sustained critical damage, but we're still operational," came the gruff reply. "We've got a bigger problem, though. The Zloth have retreated, but they're pulling something together." Alara's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What's left of their fleet?" "Not just that," Saren replied. "The flagship was only one part of their plan. We've detected a new signal, a fleet heading toward us. It's too large, too coordinated, they're bringing reinforcements. And the worst part? They've activated a war beacon. Their homeworld is coming to finish this." Alara's pulse quickened. The Zloth were known for their vast empire, but until now, they hadn't needed to call in their homeworld. The fleet she'd just destroyed had been part of a hunting expedition, a purge. But now it was clear, the Zloth had underestimated humanity. The war had just become more than a skirmish. It was going to be a full-scale conflict. "Where are they coming from?" Alara asked, her mind calculating, working to maintain control of the rapidly escalating situation. 2 hours, Saren answered, her voice grim. "At most." Alara's breath caught in her throat. 2 hours? That wasn't nearly enough time to lick their wounds, let alone prepare for what was coming. But as always, there was no choice but to face it head on. Roland set a course. "We need to find a position where we can use the terrain to our advantage. Something to give us a few extra minutes." "We don't have much in terms of options, Captain," Roland replied, his voice edged with uncertainty. "The Zloth will have likely predicted any ambush route we can take. But I've got an idea." Alara turned toward him, raising an eyebrow. "You've got one shot, Roland. Make it count." An hour later, the vanguard had taken position near an asteroid field, the broken remnants of shattered moons and space debris forming a complex labyrinth of obstacles. It was their best chance to buy time, but it was still a desperate move. The Zloth were relentless, and they wouldn't be fooled for long. "I don't like this," Zara muttered, her eyes scanning the screen as she checked the integrity of the ship's hull once more. "If they get too close, we'll be sitting ducks in this mess." "I'm aware," Alara said quietly, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest of her chair. "But if we don't try this now, they'll destroy us outright. We need the element of surprise." Roland was already overseeing the small fleet of salvage vessels they'd scavenged during their travels. They'd repurpose them for emergency situations, small, agile ships that would give them just enough movement to confuse the enemy and make them believe the vanguard was somewhere else entirely. It was a gamble, but it was the only card they had left to play. "Deploy the decoys," Alara ordered. "Decoys deployed, Captain," Zara confirmed. The Pride of Soul has activated its own, preparing for the same maneuver. The seconds dragged on. Alara's mind raced with thoughts of their dwindling resources, their fleeting options. She thought of the people they'd lost, the generations of humanity that had fought and died to get this far. She thought of Earth, still burned into her memory like an open wound. "Captain." Zara's voice broke her reverie, sharp with alarm. "The Zloth are here. They found us." Through the fog of asteroids and debris, the Zloth fleet emerged like a serpent from the shadows, their ships dark and sleek, gleaming under the distant stars. It was an overwhelming sight, one that could crush them within seconds if they didn't act fast. But Alara wasn't about to give in. "Not now. Prepare to engage," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "We may be outnumbered, but we're not out of this yet." The battle was fierce, more brutal than any Alara had faced before. The Zloth ships were closing in, their weapons lashing out with precision. The asteroid field offered them some cover, but it was hardly a shield, just a game of cat and mouse, where one mistake could mean death. Alara's eyes darted between screens, calculating every move. Each salvo of fire from their enemies was met with a desperate, evasive maneuver. The vanguard jerked under the strain of constant hits, but still it held. They held. "We can't keep this up," Zara screamed. "Shields at critical levels." Alara's heart thundered in her chest, but her mind was calm, focused. The Zloth had thought they were hunting the last remnants of humanity. But now, the humans were hunting back. "Roland, initiate phase 2 of the plan." Alara barked. We use the debris field to force them into a narrow corridor. We can't let them spread out. Use the salvage vessels to draw them in. Roland nodded sharply. Aye, Captain. The strategy was desperate, but it was their only hope. In the chaos of flashing lights, explosions, and whistling lasers, the Vanguard and the Pride of Soul began to weave their deadly dance around the Zloth, leading them through the jagged rocks and fields of space junk. The alien ships fired relentlessly, but they couldn't match the agility of the human ships in the narrow space. For a brief, fleeting moment, the Zloth were forced into a tight formation, unable to use their superior numbers to their advantage. Now, Alara screamed, the command echoing through the chaos. The final strike was launched. The Vanguard and Pride of Soul unleashed a concentrated barrage of everything they had left. Missiles, plasma bursts, and kinetic energy weapons struck the Zloth fleet in a thunderous explosion. The shockwave was immense. One by one, the Zloth ships began to fall, their mighty hulls splintering under the sheer force of the attack. Their arrogance, their pride, had cost them dearly. But the victory was short-lived. As the last of the Zloth ships disintegrated into the void, Alara's screen blinked with a new warning. More ships. More are coming. Humanity had won a battle. But that war was far from over. The remnants of the Zloth fleet drifted in pieces, a cloud of destruction scattered across the vast expanse of space. The asteroid field that had been humanity's lifeline was now a graveyard for the enemy's arrogance. But the battle's aftermath was a double-edged sword. There were no celebrations, only the grim acknowledgement that this war was far from over. Alara stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring at the charred remnants of the Zloth ships flickering out in the distance. They had won this skirmish, but Saren's warning echoed in her mind. More are coming, and they would be angrier. Stronger. Captain, Zara's voice was taut, almost strained as she monitored the fleet systems. We've got a new problem. There's a larger fleet on the way. Sensors indicate it's the Zloth homeworld's war vessels. We don't have much time. Alara's blood ran cold. The homeworld. The Zloth had sent their hunting ships for months, picking off the scattered remnants of humanity. But now it was no longer just a hunting party. They had called in reinforcements from their empire, ships brimming with firepower. They had only one goal, the complete annihilation of the human race. Are they already in firing range? Alara's voice was steady, though her mind was racing. No, Zara replied quickly, but they'll be here in a matter of hours. They've activated their war beacon, Captain. It's terrifying. The signal alone could call hundreds more fleets if left unchecked. Alara cursed under her breath. The beacon was like a call to arms for the entire Zloth Empire. If they couldn't destroy it, reinforcements would flood the system, and humanity's last defenses would be overwhelmed. Captain. Roland's voice cut through the tension. He was standing at the tactical console, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Pride of Soul is reporting massive damage from the last strike. We can't count on them for a full offensive. We're on our own. Alara clenched her fists. The Vanguard was damaged, but it was still the most formidable ship in the human fleet. They had to make it count. We won't fight them on their terms, Alara said, her voice like steel. We need to take out that beacon before the entire Zloth Empire descends on us. Zara, Roland, prep everything we've got. We'll take the fight to them. The Vanguard soared through space at maximum velocity, its engines humming as the crew worked with a singular focus. They had one mission now: destroy the Zloth war beacon and sever the call to reinforcements before it was too late. Roland worked alongside Zara at the weapons console, calibrating the final strike. A direct assault on the beacon wasn't an option. The Zloth had surrounded it with a powerful defensive perimeter. We've got a problem, Roland said, his voice sharp. Their fleet is already here. We're entering their kill zone. Alara's gaze hardened as she watched the fleet of warships grow closer on her screens. Massive Zloth capital ships loomed ahead, their imposing shapes bristling with weaponry, flanked by smaller, faster vessels. The human fleet didn't have the luxury of numbers. The Vanguard and a handful of smaller salvage vessels were all they had left. This is it, Alara muttered. No second chances. She turned to Roland. I need a plan. Now. We use their own arrogance against them, Roland said, his eyes glinting with a spark of defiance. We can't take them head on, but we can make them underestimate us. We need to slip through their defenses, bypass their main force, and hit the beacon with a precision strike. Zara added, her voice calm. The beacon is shielded heavily. But I can reroute our power to the stealth systems for a short burst. We can cloak long enough to get within striking distance. Alara's gaze sharpened. How long will the cloak last? Less than 10 minutes, Zara replied. But we'll be undetectable during that time. Good, Alara said. That's all we need. Prepare the stealth system and get our course plotted. We're going in. The vanguard descended into the heart of the Zloth fleet like a shadow in the night. Their enormous warships loomed all around them, their sensors scanning relentlessly, but the vanguard remained hidden, a fleeting whisper in the dark. Just under 2 minutes until we're within range, Roland said, his voice low. We'll need a perfect shot to break through that shield. Alara's mind was focused, her breath slow, her thoughts like the calm before storm. We don't need to break through the shield. We just need to disrupt their system long enough for the strike to land. Zara tapped into the communications array, rerouting power to the cloaking system. Stealth system is online. We're invisible to their sensors for now. The vanguard edged closer, slipping between the massive Zloth vessels as they drifted unaware, consumed by their own confidence. Alara knew they were running on borrowed time. The cloak wouldn't last long, and they would have to act fast. Prepare for weapons release, Alara ordered. As soon as we're in range, we fire everything. We can't let them recover. Roland nodded, his face tight with the strain of maintaining their stealth position. Aye, Captain. The seconds felt like an eternity as the vanguard moved deeper into the heart of the Zloth fleet. Alara's mind raced through every possible outcome. If they didn't destroy that beacon, humanity would be swarmed. The war would be over in a matter of days. Now, she said, her voice crisp with resolve. Fire. The vanguard erupted from the shadows, unleashing a devastating barrage of missiles and plasma rounds at the heart of the Zloth beacon. The explosion was immediate and violent, blinding flashes of energy tearing through the blackness of space. The beacon's shields flickered and buckled under the onslaught. The vanguard weaved in and out of the attack, narrowly avoiding the retaliatory fire from the Zloth ships, as the debris from the explosion scattered across the void. For a moment, Alara's heart stopped. Then, the beacon's systems began to fail. Its signal sputtered, then died completely, cutting off the Zloth's call for reinforcements. We did it, Zara whispered, her voice incredulous. But Alara knew it wasn't over. The Zloth fleet, wounded but still massive, turned its fury toward the vanguard. We've got them on the run, Alara said, her voice steady. But we're not done yet. We take out their command ships next. This is our one shot at turning the tide. As the vanguard slid away from the wreckage of the beacon, the Zloth fleet regrouped in pursuit. But now it was the humans who held the upper hand. Their attack had crippled the Zloth war machine, at least for the time being. The fight wasn't over, but humanity had proven one thing. They were no longer the hunted. The war had entered a new phase, and this time, the humans would be the ones calling the shots. And Alara Creel would not rest until every last invader was driven from the stars. The vanguard had barely slipped through the shock wave of the destroyed beacon when Alara felt the weight of what had just occurred settle over her. For the first time in this long, brutal war, humanity had struck a decisive blow. The beacon was down, and the reinforcements that the Zloth had been preparing to flood the system with were now cut off. But that didn't mean the war was over. Not by a long shot. Behind her, the crew was already working tirelessly to prepare for the next phase. The Zloth were still formidable, and now, more than ever, they were angry. Alara didn't have to be told what was coming next. Every human in the fleet knew that this victory, while significant, was just a spark in a much larger fire. Captain, Roland said, his voice steady but thick with the gravity of the situation, we've bought ourselves some time, but not much. We need to hit them hard while we've got a window. Alara didn't need to think twice. "You're right," she said, eyes never leaving the tactical display. The Zloth fleet was already reorganizing, their warships moving like a flood of ink across the stars. But something had shifted in their formation, an unexpected vulnerability. The beacon's destruction had sent ripples of uncertainty through their command structure, throwing their entire strategy into chaos. "I want us to make them pay for this," Ilara said, the words feeling like an oath on her tongue. "We can't just keep running. They won't stop until we're all dead. It's time to finish this." The plan was audacious. Roland had already begun gathering data on the Zloth command structure. The fleet had splintered in the wake of the beacon's destruction, but their warships still posed a massive threat. If they could break the command ship, an enormous, near-impenetrable fortress of metal and weaponry, they might just turn the tide of this war for good. "I'm transmitting the final strike plan to the Pride of Soul," Roland said, his eyes fixed on the display. "We're going to need every advantage we can get." On the Pride of Soul, Commander Saranavet had been watching the Zloth fleet reform, preparing for another desperate battle. She was tired. Her ship was battered. But she knew that the fight they were about to face would be the one that defined humanity's future. "We've got one shot at this," Saren said over the comms, her voice grim. "We'll bring our fleet in close, but only for as long as it takes. No heroics. Once the command ship is down, we scatter. We'll be a beacon for every damn fleet in the galaxy if we don't get out fast." Ilara's face hardened, her fingers tight on the armrest. "Understood, Commander. We're with you every step of the way." The two ships, Vanguard and Pride of Soul, maneuvered into position, slipping through the remnants of the debris field that had once been their only cover. With the Zloth in disarray, they were no longer waiting for the inevitable end. They were driving forward, propelled by something deeper than strategy, the sheer will to survive. The Zloth fleet, still reorganizing, didn't notice the human ships until it was too late. Ilara's plan was simple but daring. She would lead a direct assault on the Zloth command ship, pulling all the focus and firepower away from the Pride of Soul, which would act as a distraction, drawing enemy ships into a trap. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring to life. But before Ilara could even give the command to fire, a flare of light erupted from the direction of the Zloth flagship. It was not a weapon. It was a signal, a call to arms. "Damn it," Ilara muttered, her stomach dropping. "They're reinforcing their command ship with a superweapon. We don't have much time." Zara's voice cut in urgent. "Captain, the ship sensors are picking up large energy readings from their flagship. Whatever they're preparing, it's going to be catastrophic." Ilara didn't hesitate. "All ships, full speed ahead. We hit them first, and we hit them hard." The battle that followed was unlike anything Ilara had ever experienced. The Vanguard danced through a sea of Zloth ships, weaving in and out of enemy fire as they made their way toward the heart of the fleet. The Pride of Soul followed close behind, its guns blasting, drawing the attention of the Zloth ships, who turned their fire toward the larger target. "Missiles incoming." Zara cried out. "We're getting hammered from all sides." The Vanguard shook as the first barrage hit, but Ilara was already prepared, calculating their next move. "Stay on course. Get us closer to that command ship." The Pride of Soul fired its main cannons, sending a shockwave through the surrounding Zloth vessels. Their ships faltered, their formation in disarray as human ships pushed through the chaos. "It's working, Captain," Roland said, his voice tense. "We've got them distracted. We're within striking range." Ilara's eyes flickered to the target, an immense, dark ship that had begun powering up its weaponry. The Zloth command ship, a behemoth of destruction, was getting ready to launch a superweapon that could turn the tide of the battle in their favor. But it wasn't just their fate on the line. The entire human race was at risk. "Ready the final strike," Ilara ordered, her voice unshaken. "We take that ship down now." The Vanguard rocketed forward, closer and closer to the Zloth flagship. Ilara's grip on the controls tightened as the ship's systems hummed with energy, ready to unleash everything they had left. "Activating the breach charges," Zara said, her voice cold and precise. Target locked. The Zloth flagship was massive, its hull nearly impervious to regular weaponry. But humanity had learned to adapt. The Vanguard's last weapon, a newly adapted version of the plasma torpedoes, was capable of breaching even the thickest defenses. Fire! Alara shouted. The torpedoes shot out with blinding speed, striking the flagship's shields with devastating force. The ship shook as the first blast hit, followed by a second, more powerful strike that sent shockwaves rippling through the enemy ship. For a brief moment, there was nothing but fire, smoke, and chaos. The Zloth flagship erupted in a massive explosion, a flare of light, so intense it illuminated the entire battlefield. "We've done it," Zara shouted, her voice filled with relief. But Alara didn't allow herself to breathe just yet. The Zloth fleet was still in motion, still trying to reorganize. "Roland, bring us about. We're not finished yet. We've broken their command structure, but we need to make sure they can't recover." The remaining Zloth ships, reeling from the loss of their flagship, were scrambling to regain control, their once coordinated attacks turning into a chaotic mess. With their leadership broken, their morale shattered, they were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. The Vanguard and Pride of Sol pressed the attack, hitting the disoriented Zloth fleet with everything they had left. Missiles, plasma blasts, and kinetic rounds tore through the remaining vessels, bringing down the last vestiges of a once dominant empire. In the end, the Zloth were scattered, broken, and fleeing. Their fleets had been decimated, their leadership crushed. Humanity, against all odds, had secured victory. But Alara knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one in which humanity would rise from the ashes, ready to take its place among the stars. And the Zloth would learn that humans, once the hunted, had become the hunters. And there was no escape from that.